who are these Amalekites? Well, there's a simple answer to that, which is the Amalekites were one of the many semi-nomadic tribe and tribal confederations that lived in the ancient Near East, in the Levant, to go back to the 19th century. And they were known as being especially aggressive to their neighbors. They were raiders and the ones that would sort of dive in to their neighbor's territory, take what they could, and run off. That's sort of the general idea. But the Amalekites have a larger role within the Jewish psyche. They are different than many of our other ancient Near Eastern neighbors, and the role they occupy is crucial for us understanding morality in general, but also some very specific Jewish concepts. So we're going to look at how the Amalekites crop up, what they represent, and what that can mean for us in the 21st century, because I don't know about you, but I've never met anyone with an Amalekite passport. And yet, this concept is still very much important and very operative. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. We're on the Amalek who, and we're going to begin with their appearance on the stage as actors. They actually do appear earlier than this, but, well, we'll get there. The people thirsted for water, and the people murmured against Moshe and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst?" The argument goes on, and then eventually they solve this issue, and the name of the place was called Massah and Merivah because of the striving of the children of Israel, and because they tried Adonai, saying, "Is Adonai among us or not?" Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moshe said to Yoshua, "Choose us out men, and go out, fight with Amalek tomorrow. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hands." And yea, we win. Okay, now, in typical rabbinic fashion, and any careful reader should agree with this, we can't just say the words of the Torah happen to be spilling out in this particular way. Look at the juxtaposition of the two different texts. We begin with the story about the argument over the water, right? But what is the crux of that issue? What are the people most upset about? And what is the challenge that the Torah highlights from their upset that is so problematic? Is it because people want water? No. Wanting water is perfectly natural. What's the issue?
They don't trust God to provide it.
They don't trust God. Right? God is not with us. God is not standing alongside of us. Why did you bring us out here? Was it just so we could die of thirst? After everything that's been done for them, here they are now standing on the other side of the sea, having just watched, the great miracle of their liberation, and it still seems, in the words of the Torah, that the people don't trust God. And what happens next? They get attacked. That is not considered coincidental in the literary style of the Torah, that there is a connection between the first and the second half. And we'll come back to what that connection might be, but I want to draw your attention to it. But we have to then go into Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses is retelling all of the events of the earlier parts of the Torah, and Moses is trying to recapture the meaning of those different events. And this is the maftir that we read today. Well, more specifically, David read today. "Remember what Amalek did to you by the way as you came out of Egypt, how he met you by the way and smote the hindmost of you." That is to say, he didn't square up for battle and send his troops against you. They raided the tail end of the caravan of the Israelites, picking off the old or the young or the people that were unable to keep up with the main pace that would have eventually caught up when the camp was being made. This is standard caravan travel techniques and standard bandit attack on the people that are the weakest in order to have opportunities to walk off with some spoils. "All that were enfeebled in your rear when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall be, when Adonai your God has given you rest from all of your enemies round about in the land which Adonai your God gives you as an inheritance to possess it, that you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, you shall not forget." So once we have enough peace from actual existential threats, that is to say, from enemies that are attacking our borders that have the potential to wipe us out, once those threats are down, then we can turn our attention towards essentially the terrorist cells of Amalek, which are not an existential threat. They were never going to threaten to wipe us all out. They were only going to continue to attack the periphery of our nation, causing a bleeding ulcer, if you will, within the peace, but never an actual existential danger. But here we get the wonderful paradox of you will remember, you will wipe them out, and wipe out their remembrance, and don't forget. Like, how can I wipe out the memory of them and not forget? I mean, wouldn't I need to forget in order for the memory of them to be gone? And that's really the essence of the paradox here, which we have a wonderful quote, in my opinion, from the Midrash in Tanhuma here, which shows a little bit of the snarkiness of how the rabbis would read the text. Israel said to the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the world, are you telling us to remember? You remember, as forgetfulness is common among us, but with you there is no forgetfulness. Thus, Deuteronomy 25, remember what Amalek did to you. So you always have to remember the rabbis had a sense of humor, and they used it with very good precision. So they're saying, hold on a second, I can just imagine the smart aleck Israelites, I mean, after all, the generation that was coming out were trouble, and they turn to God and say, wait, you're telling us to remember something? Come on, God, you know me. I'm going to forget this the moment you turn away, and I'm back to the sheep. How about if you remember it, God? If you're so bugged about Amalek, if you want to remember what they did, you can remember that, God, because you couldn't forget anything if you tried. And just the rest of us, we won't, it's off our shoulders then. And that's trying to highlight the irony. Do you really think, this is Midrash is saying to the Israelites of that generation, do you really think God is commanding you to remember in the same way that I write a checklist? In the same reason that someone might put a reminder on their calendar? That this is not a remember in the sense of, oh yeah, I need to make sure I don't forget to take out the trash kind of remember. This is a remember as in learn, understand, keep as a core value of what happened here. And yes, we can talk about blotting them out, which is about breaking their power and breaking the culture that led to Amalek and what they stood for. But the remembrance is not that I'm going to remember every single person. I'm going to remember what they were, and I will learn from that. In the same way that we say Zechor as one of the variations of the Ten Commandments for keeping Shabbat. We're not being told to remember Shabbat in the sense that, oh, wait, what day is it? Oh, yes, it's Shabbat kind of remember. It is telling us to remember Shabbat, to actively engage in behaviors that make Shabbat special and occupy a certain place within our psychological, spiritual, and personal lives. So Amalek is supposed to have that same kind of space. It's not just about don't forget. Okay, so what could those spaces be that Amalek is going to occupy? Well, first of all, we need to go back and find out who Amalek was in the first place. And like I said, he doesn't just show up in Exodus. That's just where he gets some actual behavior. We hear about Amalek way back in Genesis 36. These are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites in the land of Seir. All right, hold on. So that means that Amalek is one of the descendants of Esau. These are the names of Esau's sons. Eliphaz, the son of Adah, the wife of Esau. Reuel, the son of Basemat, the wife of Esau. The sons of Eliphaz, so now we're into grandchildren of Esau, were Teman, Ophir, Zepho, Gatam, and Kanaz. So we have a whole set of grandsons out of Esau, and Timnah was the concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore to Eliphaz Amalek. Okay, so who is Amalek technically? He is the progenitor of a tribe that comes out of the son of Esau with a concubine, not a full wife, but with a lesser status wife-ish. I know the terminology is strange in the modern world. A second class, if you will, second tier wife within that clan. And the Amalekites were descended from that person. So what do we know then about the Amalekites? Well, they were second class within the tribe that was descended from Esau. They would have already been treated differently compared to the actual mainline grandchildren that came out of the proper wives, the primary wives. And that was a tension that was often found throughout ancient Near Eastern cultures. We see that tension with Hagar and Sarah, and we see that tension being kind of mostly overcome with the tribes, but even there was still a stigma attached to the tribes that came from Bilhah and Zilpah as opposed to Leah and Rachel. So Amalek is already in sort of a semi-second class status. All right, chip on the shoulder kind of attitude for the tribe. Everyone with me so far? Okay, but what are we going to do with this about us? Well, according to the Talmud, a teaching of our sages, the words, "but the person who sins deliberately," taken from Numbers 15, refers to the wicked king Manasseh, who was one of those terrible kings that just murdered prophets rather than listen to their instructions, who would mock the Torah. Manasseh said, "Did Moses really have nothing better to do than write words like, 'And Timnah was Lotan's sister, and Timnah was Eliphaz's concubine'? What is the purpose of writing, 'And Lotan's sister was Timnah'?" Okay, so Manasseh is characterized in the rabbinic writings throughout the Midrash and Talmud as being a scoffer, as being an apostate, somebody that not only embraced idolatry out of personal desire, but hated Torah, hated God, and attacked the very idea of Torah and study and all that that gave us. Now, of course, he was being characterized as such, not just as a historical figure, but also as a stand-in for everybody who lived during the Second Temple period when the rabbis were most active, and saying, yeah, we know people like that today too. There are people who are living in our towns that say, I don't believe this Torah thing. You think God is writing about who was born to which concubine? Why would God bother with that? That would be beneath the deity. Therefore, the book is not right, and therefore the deity is false, and therefore I can do what I want. And the rabbis are trying to rebut that sort of attitude. And they give an example of what the purpose of telling us would be. Well, Timnah was a royal princess. As it is written, Aluf Lotan and Aluf Timnah. The idea was that she was of royal status, but by an aloof, an uncrowned ruler is meant, meaning that she was more from a tribal chieftain category rather than being among the royalty of the community. So yes, her family had status, she was from an upper clan, but she wasn't at the top of the social hierarchy. Everyone with me so far? And yes, that absolutely parallels what we see about Amalek, her son, eventually too. Desiring to join the Jewish people, she went to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but they did not accept her. So Timnah, this daughter of a prominent chieftain, says, you know what? This Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob group, they look pretty good. I would like to join them. I want to become part of their group and their clan. And they said, no, you cannot convert, you cannot join us. They reject her. So she went and became a concubine to Eliphaz, the son of Esau, saying, I had rather be a servant to this people than a princess of another nation. So she's like, well, if Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob won't let me into the family, Esau, they're not exactly friendly extension of the family. He seems like they'll let me in a reduced subservient role as this concubine. So I'll go there. That's as close as I can get to being part of the main trunk of the Jewish people, is this offshoot that's coming out of Esau. And so therefore, I would rather be a concubine than a princess if I can at least get closer. Now, notice what they're doing for the emotions of this woman, that this is her desire, is to be closer to God, to be closer to the Jewish people. And because she was rejected, she goes to second best, and then second best of that. Second best being Esau, and second best of that being a concubine to one of Esau's sons, not even a full wife. But she's okay with that. Doesn't exactly seem like her son Amalek was okay with that. From her, Amalek was descended, who afflicted Israel. Why so? Because they should not have repulsed her. So this is one of the standard tactics of the rabbis. They take a lesser-known character in the Torah, they look carefully at the wording, they understand the implications, and then they draw an instruction, a moral lesson for the rest of us. Are we learning to hate Amalek from this story? No, we're actually learning to have sympathy with Amalek from this story. This is the lesser son of the offshoot of Esau, and honestly, anyone who grows up in Esau's household, what chance do they have in the first place, since Esau was not a great guy? And the idea of elevating his mother because of her unusual wording in the Torah to somebody that maybe was trying to become a better person, to join the Jewish people, to follow the path of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and she was pushed off. And what would then be the lesson that the people who lived during the days of the rabbi, especially during the Second Temple period, and the aftermath, what would their lesson have been to the average person? Shouldn't have been. So what does that mean for me if I'm living in Tiberias in the year 100 CE? And we've already had the temple destroyed by the Romans. We're still under occupation. What is the lesson to me? My Roman neighbor comes and says, so why are you guys still Jewish? Let me tell you. Right, that we're supposed to be welcoming, that we are supposed to be inviting. We're not supposed to shut the door on those that want to become Jewish. That even though we had suffered so much, because remember that was the target audience for most of the rabbinic period, was under Roman occupation and then the destruction, that we are supposed to remain with the doors open. And that if we don't, if we shut the door on those who are looking for Judaism, they'll go somewhere else. And then their descendants are going to come back to haunt us. And do we see that in first century, second century of CE? Oh yeah, absolutely. We see it with the nascent interest of many people that were interested in becoming Jewish, that were repulsed, and they end up becoming Christian. And when Christianity takes hold of the Roman Empire, it becomes official policy that Jews are to be subservient across the empire, not only in Israel where we had led national rebellions, but now as a religious policy of intolerance. The rabbis are criticizing that because we have pushed away too many people from allowing them to become Jewish, we ended up breeding the grounds of a virulent, violent form of Christianity that would eventually come back to attack us once it had attained imperial power through the Roman Empire. That we create another Amalek through our intolerance. Amalek is our child. Amalek is not Esau's problem. Amalek never had to happen. Timnah could have become part of the Jewish people, and then Amalek, if still born, would have been born within the Jewish fold and would have been one of us. But our intolerance created their intolerance. Following the story here? Okay, onward then. Said Rav Humya, a parable. To what is the matter comparable? To a boiling bath into which no creature is able to descend. A certain ruffian came and leapt down into it. Even though he was scalded, he made it cool for others. Okay, what in the world are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about a play on words. It says in the Maftir that there was this karcha, this happening upon you, this circumstance, this attack by Amalek. It's really quite a difficult word to translate. But of course, what does the Hebrew word kar mean? Going back to your basic Hebrew 101 class. What's that? Cold, right? So rather than saying it's from kara, meaning to happen, what if we just say it's from kar, meaning cold, and read it as being they cooled you? That the Amalekites, when they attacked us when we were leaving Egypt, cooled us. What does that mean? Well, imagine there was a boiling spring, and some tough guy that didn't know any better jumped into the spring. Yeah, he's going to get hurt, but the spring is also going to cool down because of him jumping into it. It's going to be less hot, less protective of, or prohibitive of keeping people out. So what happens? So also when Israel came out of Egypt and the Holy One, blessed be He, divided the sea before them, fear of them fell upon all the peoples. Turn the page. When Amalek came and joined in battle with them, even though he received his at their hands, he made them lukewarm before the peoples of the world. So what was Amalek's great attack against us, it wasn't how many people he killed, because he was not the most fierce and numerous of our military enemies in our exodus from Egypt. It was the fact that he removed the veil of invulnerability. That we were under this wonderful cloud of protection, not only literally from God, but in the eyes of all the other nations who went, they just beat up Egypt. We're not going to mess with them. And the Amalekites wander up and go, bah, and jump in. And yeah, they get burnt and have to retreat. But they did also hurt us. They did also succeed, kind of. And if they succeed kind of, then that means other people might succeed as well. And so they broke that illusion of our complete invulnerability, which meant now it was going to be a harder slog for us to establish ourselves and maintain peace. Because peace is often best maintained by an illusion that attack is pointless. Once people believe that there could be a chance of success, then peace goes away. That's why, despite the problems of nuclear weapons, mutually assured destruction actually did keep some forms of peace, because everybody knew that attack was pointless. You take away that, you believe you can win a war, and war becomes more likely. All right, so let's take a look at what we do actually with Amalek when we get a hold of them. This may help answer some of the questions that might have been circling in your mind as you read through what looked like genocide in the Haftarah. If the 7 nations, meaning the 7 nations of the land of Canaan, or Amalek, refuse to make peace, not one of them may be left alive. And then Kesef Mishnah, the commentary on Rambam's Mishnah Torah, adds, included in making peace is the acceptance of the 7 laws. For if they accepted these 7 laws, they would no longer be included in the category of the 7 nations, nor in the category of Amalek. They would be considered like fit Noahides. So Kesef Mishnah is helping us understand that what Rambam is saying here is very powerful and based upon, of course, the Talmud and earlier text, which is we were never trying to exterminate the people of the 7 nations. We were never trying to exterminate the people of Amalek. We were trying to exterminate their ideology. And their ideology needed to be broken, and unfortunately it was contained within their societies, communities, and people. And as such, if they refused to make peace, meaning refused to relinquish their commitment to this form of aggression, of violence, of attacking, then yes, war was inevitable, and we would wage total war so that they could not inflict that style of behavior upon anyone else. As I was discussing with this table over here before we began, very much this is like the fight of World War II, where nobody wanted to kill all the Germans. Well, sure, there were a few people, but the vast majority of us did not want to kill all the Germans. We wanted to exterminate Nazism. Unfortunately, Nazism was embedded within German culture, and that meant that you had to actually attack their cities and attack their armies and try and destroy their means of making war in order that Nazism could be defeated and prevented from spreading further and causing more harm. Did anyone want to bomb Dresden just because, yay, we're killing Germans? No. Did people feel it might be necessary to inflict that kind of enormous damage so that the country of Germany would no longer be able to project power and would no longer be able to defend the Nazi leaders from the repercussions of their behavior? Yes. And so too, as Kesef Mishnah is explaining the halakha here, when Israel marched into Israel, when the tribes of Israel marched into the land of Israel, or Canaan as it was called at the time, it was not, we want to go to every house and kill every person in the house. It was, we want to make peace, and by peace, you're going to have to actually sacrifice the horrible parts of your ideologies. And yes, we are unrepentant in the sense that we do believe there are objective measures of right and wrong. We're not saying everyone has to be Jewish. The 7 Noahide laws are very minimal, like don't murder, don't steal from other people, things like that, have justice. And we believe that everyone in the world should live like that. They can do it in their own style, and there's much room for variation. But yeah, if you want to still live in our country, then you have to give up your hate and your violence and your murderous ways. If you can't agree on that, then we can't really just be peaceful neighbors. Then it's going to be war. And that's the underlying idea for the conquest of the land in general and for the war against Amalek. Questions, comments? Because I know this is something that can often be very troubling to us when we read through the story of Amalek or any of the sections of the conquest of the land of Israel, such as the book of Joshua or the book of Judges. But understanding that our attack was not on the people, but our attack was on the ideology. And understanding that, yes, sometimes that is necessary, that we are not 100% relativists, and that if you've ever heard of the paradox of tolerance, that we recognize that that is something that needs to be overcome. Are people familiar with the paradox of tolerance? Okay, paradox of tolerance is a modern phrase for what we've understood for a very long time, which is if you are tolerant of intolerance, intolerance will eventually drive away your tolerance. That if you are tolerant of intolerance, oh, you're a Nazi? Well, you know, you have the right to be so. That's your choice. My choice is not to be a Nazi. You just, you know, you do you, I'll do me. Eventually, you are allowing those ideologies that are intolerant to gain strength, power, and a position with which to inflict violence upon the tolerant, and they are not going to reciprocate the tolerance once they have that authority. And then those who wanted to promote tolerance will be crushed under the heel of the intolerance that they tolerated. So, yes, we should be tolerant of all, except for those that are intolerant. Intolerance itself cannot have a place within a tolerant society to be tolerated, because when you do, it will continue to grow. The classic version of this that I've often heard repeated is, how do you create a Nazi bar? By serving drinks to one Nazi. Because if you serve drinks to one Nazi, then he is going to invite his friends. And the people who don't want to be around Nazis are going to see that Nazis are happy here. And if Nazis are happy here, then good people will leave, and more Nazis will come. And eventually, your bar will be a Nazi bar, because you serve drinks to a Nazi. That there are certain bright red lines beyond which we dare not cross, even while being tolerant. Now, the bar for tolerance should be very, very low. We do not need for people to justify themselves very much to deserve tolerance. As long as they are willing to be tolerant of others and they are not doing harm to others, then we will tolerate them to the ends of the earth, regardless of how silly we may think they are, benighted or foolish or whatever. And, you know, that's okay, because I'm sure they think the same about me and us. But if they are intolerant and they wish to wipe out those that differ from them, then no, they don't get that protection of tolerance. Did you have a question?
I just want to comment. Yeah, I guess this is exactly what you were saying is happening in Israel right now with the Knesset.
Well, the Knesset, it's harder because, I mean, there is a definite element of the current coalition that was elected on a platform of intolerance. And it is not, they are not in charge of the government, because coalition politics in Israel are always messy, but they are certainly exerting an influence. And the question is going to be, over the next month or two, just how big of an influence will their intolerance have? And this is something that's going to be played out. Right now we're already struggling with, if you watched the news in Israel this last week, there was a terrorist attack against Israelis, and there was a retaliation not by the military, not by the police, but by Israeli vigilantes that went into a Palestinian village, set fire to things, and attacked the people there as well. That's problematic, right? Obviously, bringing people to justice if they committed terrorist acts, A-okay. Vigilante justice, that is a paradox. You cannot have vigilante justice. You can either have vigilantes or you can have justice. You don't get to have both at the same time. No matter how good it may make you feel and how righteous you may believe yourself to be, as soon as you say, well, I have the authority to go and burn someone else's house because someone from their village committed a crime, you are now exactly on the same level as those people that perpetrated the attack in the first place. So yes, whether or not that's going to be tolerated, and that type of violence from within the Jewish world projected outwards, that's going to be a very difficult thing to watch unfold over the next few months. Onward. This is from a more modern summary from Yitz Greenberg's The Jewish Way, Living the Holidays, which is, by the way, a wonderful book if you are interested. The primary lesson of Parashat Zachor is that true reconciliation comes through repentance and remembrance. Confronting the evils of the past is the most powerful generator of moral cleansing and fundamental reconciliation. Repentance is the key to overcoming the evils of the past. When people recognize injustice, they can correct the wrongdoing and the conditions that lead to it. Remembrance is the key to preventing recurrence. So as he's trying to highlight, and hopefully you've picked up as a common thread, we're not remembering Amalek just so that we can say they were bad. We're remembering Amalek to remember the type of badness they were and prevent it from occurring in others and from occurring within ourselves. Naivete and amnesia always favor the aggressors, the Amalekites in particular. The Amalekites wanted to wipe out an entire people, memory and all. Amnesia completes that undone job. Ingenuousness leads to lowering the guard, which encourages attempts at repetition. One of the classic evasions undergirding naivete is the claim that Amalek is long since gone. Only primitive people are so cruel. Only madmen or people controlled by a Hitler type would do such terrible things. The mitzvah of Zachor is a stern reminder that Amalek lives and must be fought. Through Zachor, one learns to distinguish types and levels of evil. Not every evil is Amalek, but the ultimate evil must be destroyed. King Saul had a chance to wipe out Amalek, but in pity he spared Agag the king. Centuries later, Haman the Agagite, the descendant of Agag, plotted the mass extermination of the Jews. Says the Talmud, whoever is compassionate to those who deserve cruelty ends up being cruel to those who deserve compassion. Which is, like I said, an earlier statement of the paradox of tolerance, but we don't have copyright. So this idea that Rabbi Greenberg is trying to get across to us is that the remembrance of Amalek is not just a badge that we wear. It is a spur for action and for protection of our own ethical direction, as well as the ethical direction of others around us. Whether their villainy be aimed at us or others, we have to recognize Amalek when we see it, and we have to stand against it. And if we don't, if we say, well, maybe they're not so bad, maybe I shouldn't get involved, you will end up, if you have the luxury of still being around, having to do worse things to stamp it out in retrospect, which we can see as played out in the Haftarah and many other passages. If we had been more understanding of Timnah in the beginning and never created Amalek, we never would have had to go in and wage total war against the Amalekites. So too, if we had done a better job of preventing the resurgence of Nazism, if we had done a better job of preventing the extortionary demands of the Treaty of Versailles, we never would have had to land people on Normandy to go in and try and destroy the Nazi regime. That because the job was left undone, we had to go in and do it with much greater effort and much greater loss of life on both sides. The gematria of Amalek, which is 240, is equivalent of that of safek, the word for doubt. All things holy are certain and absolute. Amalek is doubt, baseless, irrational doubt that cools the fervor of holiness with nothing more than a cynical shrug. Evil doesn't always dress up in a Gestapo uniform. It doesn't always dress up with a twirled mustache. Sometimes evil dresses up with just a, meh, what does it matter? The modern shrug of nihilism and of hedonism of why should I care about anything else? The whole world is pointless. I'll just get mine and be done with it. And what Rabbi Schneerson here, this is previous generation Schneerson, is trying to say is that is partly what caused Amalek in our story of the Exodus. We left the land of Egypt, we had all the miracles and help of God, and then when there was no water, we were like, meh, there's no God. Like, what? And what shows up in that moment of doubt? Amalek. He's putting this as being an emotional stirring, that in that opportunity, when we allow the doubt of what is right and wrong, of what is true and certain to creep within us, then Amalek takes root as well. Meaning, for our own self, when we question, well, am I really right? Is it really important that we do these things, defend this thing, be just in this way, be right this way? I mean, it is a lot of work. then we open the door for our own selves to transform into a proto-Amalek, to begin to say, well, if there really isn't a right and a wrong, if there really isn't a strong moral compass in my life, then can't I just do what I want? Can't I take what I can get away with? Can't I bully those that I can bully? Because why not? Meh. You know, who's to say it's wrong? There really isn't a judge. There really isn't a standard to follow. And then, of course, we become Amalek. And just to finish from Sifrei, remember what Amalek did to you. Remember with your mouth, and do not forget with your heart. Why is it repeated twice? One, remember, and then again, do not forget at the end. For the first, remember, yes, we will recite the story of Amalek. We will recite that in the Maftir, which we did today. But ultimately, we don't forget here, in our essence of our understanding of life, that here we do not forget what Amalek means to prevent Amalek from rising again. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
So I thought it was interesting you were mentioning just sort of how this is also perhaps part of the story of the genesis of Christianity in the Roman Empire. So I've heard it be proposed that Paul basically was a convert to Judaism. And so I don't know if there's ever been any kind of commentary on him being an Amalekite, just because he was very much opposed to the Torah in many respects. He claims to be a Pharisee, but then it turns out when he quotes the Torah, he uses the Septuagint and makes the same errors that are in the Septuagint, so he didn't have good command of Hebrew, which is kind of interesting. You wouldn't expect that for a Pharisee. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, Hebrew literacy wasn't great back then either. So, you know, the role of early Christianity is still very much being researched and discussed and debated, because the later early Christians, that is to say, once it becomes official, did a very good job of trying to scrub the record clean and to homogenize the tales that they were giving of themselves and the role of their, the ones who began down that path. But early Christianity was a mixture of people that were Jewish in every respect, except for their belief in Jesus, and their belief in Jesus came in many different varieties and flavors. But that branch was essentially exterminated by other Christians that wanted to reject the Jewishness of Christianity in the early days and replace it with its own freestanding religion. Now, I've never heard the comparison of whether they were officially labeled Amalek, and I do have to warn you that it is very tempting, and many people have throughout the ages labeled anyone they dislike Amalek, and we have to be, you know, very on guard against that, because once you say they're Amalek, then you're saying I can wage total war against them. So it's more about the pattern and tendency that I'm trying to warn us on than official labels, because the official labels always scare me, because anyone who says political party X are the new Amalekites, or leader country Y is the new Amalek, or the new Haman, always bugs me, because then they're making a legal statement about whether I'm allowed to murder them in their bed. And I don't think most people really have the wherewithal to make that kind of determination. Like I said, you can have vigilantes or you can have justice. I'll always choose justice. Other questions, comments? All right, thank you very much. Hopefully we'll be getting our nutshell schedule back on track, and we'll be able to do these more often. And for those that are home, I hope this worked.